again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Pretty solid topic. Let's get to it. Serious, not safe for work. What is the most disturbing Reddit post you've ever seen? Please remember to like, share, say hi, and subscribe. I read a post, maybe this sub, where the question was something like, people that almost got killed, what happened? This one guy told a story and shared pictures of his neighbor who was breaking into his house. His neighbor was lying in his garage behind some boxes just staring at him. I remember the full story, plus pictures, kinda creeping me out. This is a popular one that goes by Jason in Hell. In a nutshell, it was a guy who made a post about how to take action towards his cheating wife. He mentions how his wife would sex with their neighbor frequently, and decided to announce it one night when the neighbor was over with his wife. The in-between part is a blur, but to me it ends with him trying to leave and take the kids with him, but the wife had already killed them, then tried to kill herself. She called 911 and was uncomfortably calm about it, mentioning she killed the kids herself because she didn't want the husband to take them. A guy on this sub was asking if women would be more likely to have sex with them if he kept them captive in his basement and didn't feed them unless they gave him sex. It seemed like bait, but after looking at his post history, I don't think it was. I don't remember exactly, but there was a post about a Spanish-speaking wife going into labor screaming at her husband to have the nurses give her medicine for the pain, but he wanted it to be a natural birth so it wouldn't translate her cries of pain. She found out years later and was devastated. Probably the guy who did an entire verified AMA about sleeping with his mom for years. I remember so much of it, but what stood out was someone asked, "Did you guys kiss during sex?" And he said, "Once, but it was weird." Yep, because that was the marker for weird. Back when r/watch people die was still a thing, I saw a post there of a dad and his small son, maybe no more than 4 or 5 years old. It was surveillance footage from the front of a store in what looked like China. The dad was waiting around for something in the front of the store while his son is playing around, playfully hugging his dad's leg, hanging on from them. He grabs his dad's leg from behind. Dad loses balance, falls back and lands directly on his son's neck. Kid goes limp immediately. When I saw that video, I had just recently become a father and holy shit, it effing traumatized me. Anytime my kids hold on to my legs, I immediately grab onto something stable. The guys whose son was pure evil, like would run around with knives, try to kill his little sister. Eventually he went on a rampage and they had to lock themselves and their daughter in the basement until he eventually left and they never saw him again. No idea if he was dead or alive, just complete end of contact. I remember there was one in the r/marriage where the wife was getting creep vibes from the husband, and while he was out she was going through his things and found a box of his hidden in the closet with the little girl's underwear in it. I may be misremembering or combining details if I continue, but she was having a hard time feeling like her husband might be a pedophile and maybe molested children, and not believing it, then believing it, then trying to get on advice on what to do all about it. That one stuck with me, even with all the sicko whacked out stuff on the internet. The one about the 40-year-old woman who came home to find her husband of 20 plus years in bed with her mother. There were several updates, but in the end it turns out the mother had met OP's husband at a church group the mother led when he was in his early teens, and they developed a thing, but swore nothing happened until he was 18. In the meanwhile, once he turned 18, he aged out of her church group to an adult group, so their solution to being able to still hang out together was for mom to introduce him to the then 15-year-old OP. OP said she thought it was odd that her parents had never let her even talk to boys, but suddenly it was okay for her to date this 18-year-old. But he was charming and good-looking, so she didn't really question it much. Anyway, years pass. By the time the story happens, OP has one older sister, 2 sibs in their 30s, 20-year-old twin brothers, and one younger mid-teen sib. Her children are 22, 2 teenagers, one that's 8 or 9, and she's pregnant. Once all the math and DNA tests were done, the 20-year-old twins belonged to OP's husband, so they were her stepkids, not her brothers. The mom said she started having an affair due to PPD after OP was born. The 2 30-somethings refused DNA testing, saying their dad was their dad. The youngest did belong to dad. Husband moved out with mom, claiming he loved her more than OP, that mom was better at sex, and that he'd only been with OP to stay close to mom. So there's OP, 40 years old, dumped by the only guy she'd ever dated or kissed for her mother, She had 5 kids with this guy, including 3 minors, one of whom wasn't even born yet, so she was going to have to deal with this scum bucket for at least another 18 years. I cried when I read that one. I mean, if somebody wrote this script and went to a movie studio and said, I've got this idea for a movie, they'd be like, no one would believe this is real. So if this is real, whoa, like, this is wild. You guys have heard of this story before? Old WPD forum. Skier hit the barricade and basically split in 2 and bled out. Saw a lot of worse videos, but this person being filmed dying from an accident during competition really bothered me. Dude just died from doing something he practiced a million times and was world class at. Made me realize you really can go at any time. People tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. Made me sad to think what was going through each of their minds at those last moments and the lifelong trauma associated in trying to help the poor guy there. Another depressing realization in that helping others can really F you up. That video of that European, I believe guy, 16, who was jumping off a concrete edge into the sea. Catch is, there's another concrete edge to jump over before you hit the water. Well, as it turns out, this guy slips before he jumps and hits the bottom of the concrete before the water face first, quite literally splitting his face open. In the video, he's seen in the water of blood for a few seconds, then in a hospital where doctors try to bring his face back together. Guy's still breathing. Although this isn't probably the worst, it stuck with me for a while. If you're interested, all you need to look up is face split concrete. More or less likely to find it in one of the posts, but caution if you're squeamish. This one post I saw was about some catastrophic failure of an EV battery at some Chinese electric motorcycle business. In the beginning, it looked like a normal day, but then in an instant, this huge battery explodes, and not like a regular firework explosion. This thing was like a rocket blasting away at the only exit this building had. It looked hot as hell in there, as I'm pretty sure the CCTV camera began sliding down the wall like it was melting. The worst of it, though, were the screams of the poor workers. During the chaos, you can hear them crying for help and gasping for air. I don't know the aftermath, but the heat plus battery toxins probably really messed them up bad. Absolutely tragic, and it totally effed me up just thinking about them for a day or two. I definitely put back on the NSFW filter after that. The woman who discovered her husband was sending their preteen daughter sexually explicit texts, and because Reddit going to Reddit, some Redditors were trying to tell her, oh, it was just texts, it's not like he was touching the girl, as if a man sexting his own 11-year-old daughter is just a normal guy who made a small misstep. There was a post years ago about a couple that had been arrested for forcing children to hurt and maim small animals, and they'd record it. The descriptions of what they made those kids do absolutely shook me in a way that nothing else has. This post, a girl wrote about her stepmom who didn't like her, but told her this story about stranger danger. Basically, the stepmom and her friend were hiking in like the 70s or 80s and got lost. Some dude in a truck picks them up and offers to take them back to where they parked their car. But first, he has to take a detour to his cabin and leaves them in the truck while he goes inside. The friend finds a bloody knife in the truck, and they both get scared and nope the F out of there on foot. Eventually, they find their bearings and find the car. Except the man's truck is there as well, but there's no sign of him at all. The friend wanted to bolt to the car and leave. The man wasn't there after all, but the stepmom said absolutely not, and made them both wait for hours until it started to get dark. Then as night was falling, they watched in a horror as the man slithered out of the back of their car and left in his truck. He had been waiting for them there for hours. I don't recall the post. It was years ago, but it was a good one. The video of the kid that died somehow suspected drowning, and he was mostly eaten by piranhas, but his head and hands were left alone, so it was basically a child-sized skeleton with a face. Meanwhile, the wailing families in the background as they laid this kid out on a tarp. Yeah, that one effed with me. That user claiming to be a 13-year-old girl and said she used crystal meth, crack, and heroin since her parents were drug dealers. She also said she had sex with a number of adult men who were her parents' customers. I reported it to the police on the off chance it wasn't a troll. I remember I was part of one of the post r/watch people die subs called r/dead or vegetable. The whole point was that it wasn't that gory, and it should have been ambivalent on whether they were dead or not. There came a point on the sub where content got more and more extreme and was essentially just watch people die under a different name. One day, I saw a post at the top of the subreddit, which was of a suicide victim who had survived his attempt. The shotgun missed his head and blew off his face completely. All that was left of his face was a pool of blood entirely covering it. The guy was writhing in utter pain on the stretcher, and all you could hear was his muffled screams. Both of those subreddits seem like a good place to meet fine upstanding citizens and general pillars of the community. If you seek out the negative, I promise you'll always find it. I ended up on the wrong side of Reddit at some point about a year or two ago and watched a video of a side of BDSM that will stick with me for the rest of my life. It was a vac pack fetish that was linked on another thread of effed up shit. Essentially, it's this woman only wearing a thong getting into this silicone body bag which had PVC frame, and the whole fetish is the guy behind the camera used a vacuum to suck the air out. She was fully in with no breathing tubes. She clearly gave the signal to get out about a minute and a half in, and the guy behind the camera just told her to wait a little longer in the most creepy, calm voice I've ever heard. She tries to stick it out, but a minute later the panic sets in, all while he keeps telling her 30 more seconds. For note, the video went on for another 7 minutes. I'm pretty sure I experienced my first ever panic attack watching this poor woman struggle and fight, trying to pop the bag with her nails, screaming, or trying to as much as she could, and thrashing until she blacked out. Once she stopped moving, he let the air back in, opened the flap of the bag and past her head, kicked her in the head, and walked off camera. It was the longest 20 seconds of my life, until she gasped in a breath and the video ended. Even thinking about it puts my stomach in knots. This happened around 2015-16, when I first got into Reddit and made my first account. There was a lot of disturbing subs that had been banned. One post was about this guy who confessed to being a pedo and a necrophiliac. He'd joined search groups looking for missing kids in the hope of finding them dead, and he could molest or rape them. The most disturbing bit was when he talked about what he'd do when he does find a body. There was a Reddit TikTok I couldn't finish watching about a guy that had a parasite at a young age. He basically developed a fetish sort of relationship with parasites and learned to host them safely in his body and incubate deadlier ones at his home. He called them his children and would keep eggs in his pocket to spread around in public places or buffets. I was firmly convinced the demons existed after that. I'm not sure anyone will see this, I did, or remember this story, but someone had to ask nurses to share some of the most effed up things they'd witnessed. One story, I think it was in the same thread as the swamps story above, that really stuck with me, was about a teenage girl who had been adopted by her uncle after her parents died, and the uncle was pimping her out for money since she didn't have a job and charging extra to allow men to sleep with her unprotected. Needless to say, she got not only pregnant, but likely several STDs, that the uncle refused to let her get treated. By the time she ended up in the ER to give birth, the baby, which was obviously dead, had been swimming in a pool of yellow and green pus. The mother died in childbirth, as by then the infection had poisoned her system. The nurse recalls the horrible smell and other details in the story. Wish I could find the link to it here. Disturbing. There truly are awful people in this world. There was a dude minding his business on the street, possibly waiting for a ride, when some psycho dressed in all black sneaks up from behind and, with one strike from his machete, slashed the dude's foot off. After that psycho left, guy fell on his butt and held his leg up in shock, all the while blood was pooling quickly around him. Video stopped after a passerby came to help. I think the video lasted maybe 35 to 45 seconds. F's me up to this day. I mean, chopping a person's limb off, I don't even know what that is. I'm just terribly sorry that happened. Those random acts of violence are oftentimes the most disturbing. I wish I had never seen this, and it makes me sad to this day. I don't even want to type it out, but I saw a post of two men physically abusing a mentally disabled little boy. They were standing or stomping on his neck with their full body weight and laughing as he cried and struggled to breathe. I work in pediatric trauma, so I see children who are assaulted on the daily, but it was so sad to actually see it happening and not being able to help. I don't know how you can do that, then see a child crying in pain and looking up like, why are you doing this to me? You could just see the defeat in his eyes, and they were bulging from the pressure being put on his throat. No one deserves that, especially an innocent little kid. Wish I could have helped him. I've seen a lot of messed up shit on the internet, but for some reason, the thing that scared me the most was a video of some guy making a cherry bomb and lighting it in his backyard. But his dog runs over to pick it up with his mouth, and then it blew up. That shit made me cry. I think I might get a bit damaged after that, since I still, after many years, get vivid flashbacks. Anyway, I stopped looking at messed up shit on the internet after that. Couple years ago, this dude posted on Reddit his confession. He killed his girlfriend and was on the run. He shared his version of events. They got back together, but her family didn't like him because of a small incident they had before. He was up in her apartment. I forgot how it went, but she hit him. So he pushed her back a little and she got hurt. She got angry and grabbed the knife, yelled at him to leave the apartment. He said he was so sorry. He was going to leave, but she wouldn't lower the knife and he just wanted a goodbye hug. He approached. She went batshit crazy and swung at him. Next thing he knows, he took the knife from her and, in the struggle, stabbed her. He was always a spontaneous guy, so he had his passport in his car. He fled the country. He didn't plan it. He always had it in his car. This may seem like the disturbing part. It isn't. The disturbing part is how dumb Redditors can be, me included. So many people bought into his woe is me bullshit and said he sounded like a nice guy in that shit situation. That shit just spiraled out of control. Seriously? The incident with her brother? He tried to break in, the cops were called. Who the hell tries to hug someone after they'd been bad hit them? I'm like 90% sure Amber Heard literally said the same thing during the Depp trial. That JD was yelling at her to leave, but she wanted a hug. It's an abuse trick. Just a quick example that jumped to mind. Then, it turns out he stabbed her like 37 times. It was a grisly homicide. Sort of, some of it was true. There are texts that show they were getting back together, but everything else? Lies.